everyone, my name is James Feeney. Welcome to or back to my channel. Today I want to talk about energy reading, what it is, how I perceive it, how you can do it, how I do it, and what it all means and how I see it to be, just because it's something that to me always felt really ambiguous. I kind of felt detached from it and outside of it. It felt like something that was inaccessible to me. And if you're anything like me, perhaps at one point or even in a current sense, you do feel maybe outside of that. It just felt really, uh, yeah, felt really nebulous. So I'm gonna go into my thoughts on energy reading. By no means is this meant to be a definitive definition of what energy reading is. I think it's something that can be different for everybody. It's really about how you perceive it and believe it to be. So this is just one person's take on what energy reading is. And of course, my beliefs and views on this are always shifting and changing. And I'm going to do my best to really sum it up, distill it down to its core, and get at what I think it is at its most base elements in terms of how I perceive it. I have a list of notes, some copious notes that I took the other night when this was really on my mind, and I actually tried to record this video before referencing these notes, and it didn't turn out so well. So we're gonna actually, I think, throw the notes to the side and really just try to speak on this and not reference any notes. So as I see energy reading, I see it more as a perspective, a way of shifting from the practical way that, say, somebody might go about reading in terms of tarot and divination, and shifting that perspective into something that's a little bit less practical, more detached and abstract. There's an element of feeling and extrasensory perception, the vocabulary changes, and so we're using different terms from more of a practical reading sense to more of an energetic reading sense. That's a big distinction that I see commonly. I also see that we're referencing things like feelings and thought forms and concepts and more fluid and lighter and less dense areas of, I would say, being, as opposed to, say, a more practical sense where we're looking at the mundane, we're referencing the here and now, the tangible, the consensus reality a lot more. Those are some big distinctions. I think that comparison is helpful in understanding energy reading. Comparing it to something else gives us a shape or a way to look at it, gives it a bit of a form for us to sink our teeth into. And so I think that that's really helpful to start. Again, like I said, I think it's a lot more about perspectives, at least for me. So instead of choosing to, say, do a reading about my everyday life, conflicts and resolutions, if I were to, say, do a reading on the same thing but through an energetic lens, or really reading the energy of a situation, I'm going to be looking at thoughts and feelings. I might not even be as inclined to look for a resolution or a path going forward. I might seek more of an understanding. I might seek to feel what is going on. I might seek to gain some insight into the thoughts and the processes going on in a more, I would say, vague but just as helpful fashion, if that makes sense. So I think that there are times when, say, reading energy is actually a lot more helpful than reading in a more practical sense. Likewise, I think there are circumstances when reading with practicality in mind is more beneficial. I don't think that the two are entirely separate either. I think that you can take a very practical reading, tie in emotions and more abstract thoughts and feelings, and make that a method of understanding a practical matter. You can take an energetic reading where you're really focusing on thoughts and feelings and more fluid concepts, and you can bring it back down into practicality and try to work with those things going forward. So both can be intertwined. We can take elements of each and put them into a reading. A reading doesn't necessarily need to be entirely energy based. So when you're reading energy, you don't necessarily only need to be doing that. I think a healthy mix of both can really amplify and add some power to a reading. So that's just how I kind of see the almost two very distinct camps of going about reading. Now, when I say reading, I'm talking about divination using tools. That's how I primarily use divination and would go about energy reading. There are those out there who are psychics, who use the clairs, who are mediums, who are channelers, who use all sorts of different tools, and some who don't use any physical tools at all. So when I'm talking about reading, I'm talking about using tools and being more of an interpreter. So I flip a card down, I place a rune down, something to that effect, and I am interpreting what I see, whether that be through a thought, whether that be a feeling that I get, whether that be an intuitive hunch. I'm interpreting. So that is the method in which I am reading and speaking on right now. So for me, energy reading is really about laying out cards of kind of trying to go beyond what feels very in the here and now, what feels very rational and sensical in terms of trying to make sense of what is on the table. And I'm trying to push that to the side a bit. I think energy reading has some strength in being able to play on the imagination, to expand one's thoughts and feelings, to go beyond what is here. It's nice to really engage in the idea that there's more than just the here and now, that there may be something beyond us, whether that be a higher self or just we're accessing a different part of our brain, a different aspect of consciousness. It might be a divinity. So this really pertains to your belief systems, I think. I don't think that energy reading is exclusive to any one religion, spirituality, belief system at all. I think that those who don't believe in anything or who see themselves as atheists can just as easily read energy. It's really about the way in which you perceive energy, what you see energy to be. And for me personally, it is about perspective. So I'm not closed off to the idea of there being something higher beyond me, some sentience or outside forces and powers. I would say that I am somewhere in between. My beliefs are constantly changing. So while I'm open to outside forces potentially being a factor, that's not necessarily what I hard and fast believe. So I'm open to the ideas, I'm open to different things, and that's part of, for me, what makes energy reading really exciting. Just seeing what I pick up, what I interpret, and how it feels to have come through, whether that be through me, whether that feel as though it's coming from something outside of myself, and that's part of the excitement. And I really like to let my imagination play. There's something about energy reading to me that feels very playful, and part of what's inspired this video is in recent times I've come across a lot of Instagrammers and YouTubers in both the tarot and various spiritual communities who do energy updates, energy readings. A lot of these have been on a more global and societal scale, and I think that got me thinking about what energy reading is. I was curious myself in really understanding what it is that they were doing, what the core basis of what they were speaking on was about. So, and in that sort of energy reading, we're talking about a grand scheme more so. So it's a wider scope. And I think that energy reading lends itself to a broader scope, to a grander scheme in a way, just because we aren't so mired down in the minutiae and the details. If we were to say do a global practical reading, there would be a lot of infrastructure and details to take into account to try to speak on and navigate in terms of interpreting and reading. When we're talking about energy, we can speak in larger concepts, more, I would say, fluid and vague terms that are easier to digest and to apply to the details, but not necessarily getting at the details themselves in terms of a reading. So we can talk about feelings of unrest, we can talk about feelings of shifts and consciousness, we can talk about a sort of a global interconnectedness, and that's something that you can do more so, I would say, in energy reading as opposed to a more practical reading. In a practical reading, we're looking at, say, a conflict, a resolution. We're looking at individual people's lives and what's to come of them and going on within them. And in a larger sense, there's just too much going on to be practical, or at least it's not easy to be so practical in a larger sense, I find. So when I see these global energy readings and societal readings, trying to gauge where we're at now and where we're headed as far as maybe a future forecast goes, I think that those energy readings lend themselves really well to that, because we can take almost this collective, this interconnectedness, and we can measure it in thought forms and abstractions. And that gives us something to really look at. It gives us a larger umbrella and scope. So not that either is better or worse, but I do think that practical reading is something that is harder to take grand scale, whereas energy reading can easily, or I would say not simplify, but make the idea of reading in a grander way a little bit easier. And energy reading, of course, can be done individually. You can read your own energies as a human being. I do think that there's, to some degree, a detachment that comes with energy reading. So when I say I'm reading my own energy, I am even calling it my own energy. It's a different piece of myself. I'm saying that I'm reading my energy. I'm not reading about me. When I'm reading the energies of the world or doing an energy update, I'm kind of separating the society and the people and I would say the sense of self and the selfhood just a little bit in order to look at these, I would say, thought forms and abstractions. So that's not to say that it's impersonal, but it's more to say that we are sloughing off, so to speak, the heavier and denser aspects that come with the self to look at things through a different lens. And of course, we can then relate back what we've found in terms of the self and how it's affecting the self or a group of people. And that's really valuable as well. Whereas in the practical, I think we are, the selfhood and the sense of self is very integral. I am doing a reading for myself, the being that is me, the sentience that is me. When I'm reading my energy, I'm reading the energy that may exist within myself or around myself, but I'm reading that energy. And whether or not that energy is a part of me, I'm considering it somewhat different because I've called it that energy and I'm not calling it myself. So those are a few distinctions. I think that speaking about and having the dialogue about energy reading and kind of getting those thoughts out there is valuable for understanding. It's been helpful for me to understand through watching others and trying to sort out my own ideas and conceptions regarding energy reading. So if you're somebody who feels like that's a less accessible topic or something that you've had some trouble understanding, I'm in the same boat as you, and I'm hoping that we can gain a better understanding, and that maybe through watching this that you will form your own thoughts and opinions and evolve the way that you might see energy reading. So we're going to get into an exercise in just a second, but I want to talk a little bit more about I would say the difference of energy reading and what makes energy reading its own specific facet of reading. So we do get this big sense of the micro and macrocosm as a school of thought, and that's something that I think has played a role in many esoteric, occult, theological, spiritual, and religious backgrounds going way, way, way back. So we have this idea of the grander scheme or the larger universal cosmic sense being exemplified through oneself or an individual finite sense. So the microcosm being, say, a human being or a very finite being or thing, reflecting and exemplifying the grander, the larger, the outward, the all, and the all also exemplifying or being present within the one. So that I think that that's something that we often run into in energy reading, is this sense of interconnectedness. I think the micro and the macrocosm connection, the within and without idea, at the as above, so below, really lends itself well to the ideas of interconnectedness. It really is saying that I am just as I am, in a sense, connected to something larger. That larger thing is connected to me. We, in a sense, are one and the same. What is inside of me is also outside of me and beyond me. What is beyond me is within me. And all of that has to do with interconnectedness. And the idea of energy reading, just in that we are thinking about something that is beyond us, something that is extrasensory, something that is abstract, the idea of interconnectedness is a lot easier to understand as a concept, as an idea, as a thought form, much more than it is as a tangible feeling, or to really truly see it with our 5 physical senses. So in a practical sense, we can say understand the concept of interconnectedness, but it's really hard to say experience, whereas in an energetic sense, when we're really trying to interact with thought forms and concepts, the idea of interconnectedness is more present and digestible. It's something that I would say is easier to interact with through an energetic sense than it is through a very practical, mundane and dense sense. So these are 2 very, I would say, distinct ways of reading. We've been kind of differentiating the 2. The key contributing factor in energy reading is changing one's perspective and lens through which we are choosing to see the cards, to interpret through a tool, or if you divine through other means, just shifting that perspective and lens. For me, that's been the biggest the biggest thing. And so I'm going to take us over to my tarot table for a little exercise. Really, it's just going to be showing you guys how I would go about reading energy or divining energy through a tool or medium, tarot for me. And I'm going to be using the Orbifold Tarot. Now, I've chosen this deck specifically for this exercise for a reason. This is the deck that I use, I would say, most days to do energy readings on a given day. It's a highly abstract deck. There are no people, there are no scenes, there are no animals, there's nothing that references the mundane world, the consensus reality, the here and now that we can pick up on with our five core senses. We have color, we have shape, we have form, we have line. They're evocative. They to me, it feels like I am in a different dimension or state of being. And if you are somebody who maybe is new to the idea of energy reading, who would like to explore it, or if you're at home and you want to do these exercises and this is something that you don't often do, for me personally, and this is just a tip that's worked for me, using decks that don't have anything that has to do with the here and now has been really helpful for me. So when I'm doing this, I don't like to seek out decks that have people and scenes and nature or animals, anything like that. This has been a great help for me in shifting to that perspective or that lens, that viewpoint through which one would say read energy. So I'm going to take us over to my tarot table and we're going to actually do, I guess, an energy reading of the day. This would be an example. You can read energy of the society at large, you can read your own energies, you can read the energies of a dynamic, you can read the energies within a household. There are infinite and innumerable options in terms of energy reading. So hopefully this is helpful. It's really just going to be taking you guys through what I do and how I go about doing this myself. So we're going to head over there. Hi everyone, so we are over at my tarot table with the Orbifold Tarot. Just quickly, I'm going to take you guys through an example of how I might go about doing an energy reading for the day, and just kind of the thought process and how I would differentiate that from, say, just doing a daily draw and thinking about it in terms of my day. This is really about understanding the way and that shift of perspective that I spoke about and what that means in terms of interpreting the cards. So just give it a little shuffle. So we'll lay out a few cards. I find that with decks that have this element of minimalism that this one does, it's nice to have at least 2 or more cards to look at so that we can compare the two, we can get a sense of the way that they interact with each other. Just pulling one for me has felt like it wasn't enough at times, so I'm going to pull 3 for us, and we're just gonna take some notes, not take some notes, but really just take note of the sorts of ways in which I might choose to read and look at these cards for the purposes of reading energy. So we have the 10 of Earth, the 9 of Earth, and the 3 of Water. I can really jump off with my imagination. I think energy and imagination go hand in hand, and we need an element of imagination in order to read energy. So I'm thinking of the greens and blues. To me, this feels it feels natural, it feels placid. There's this element of decrease as we go forward. So I'm thinking of this sort of tense forms of energy feeling very heavy here and feeling lighter as we go forward. And there's also this sort of release as we enter that blue area. So I'm not trying to even reference traditional tarot meanings. I'm looking at the colors. I'm looking at the progression of these shapes together and how they feel to me. I am looking at the way that things are formed. So here it almost looks like 2 flowers that are kind of diverging. It reminds me of almost like a life form that's about to become 2 different things. And in a way, it feels as though we just have the single one here. It's separated itself. So I'm looking at, say, this level of what feels like group or people together, feelings and things like that, and the separation as we go forward, and a simplification ultimately, something that feels a little bit detached and free. And so to me, this feels like a very natural progression, something that feels fluid, it feels very calm and subtle. So if I were, say, reading the energies, I might think of this element of simplicity to come throughout the day. I might think of things like a little bit more of this tense, compact feeling of I want to just use the word tension a lot, but feeling tense, feeling as though there's just too much, and reaching a point of what feels like bliss at the end. So that's a big element going on here. I do try to keep myself from connecting it to practical things, instead of, say, thinking about in terms of my morning, am I around a lot of people? Am I feeling tense? I want to kind of detach. And it's fun for me to really look at this in an abstract way, to let my imagination go free, and then to reflect on what it is that I thought and interpreted later on, and what kind of practical implications it had, how it played out. So I will take a practical stance towards the end of the day when I'm reflecting on my initial feelings and that energetic reading that I did in the morning. But at first glance, I do want to keep myself from looking too practically at these cards. I also sometimes like to, say, flip open a notebook and either write the words that pop in my head right away, or to draw pictures and colors. So with markers and colored pencils, things like that, getting the feelings out. There doesn't need to be a word assigned to what it is that I'm feeling, but if I can draw it, if I can use a color to describe it, that's just as helpful for me in this way. So I hope that that gives you guys a sense of what I'm doing when I'm looking at these cards and flipping them over and choosing to look at them in an energetic sense. That's just the way that I start with those vague things. Of course, I would probably take more time and actually take the time to create something from this and get at what it's getting at. And I don't necessarily need to fully remove it from practicality, but in that initial interpretation, I don't want to get in the way of what the energy might be. So there's that. We're going to head back over to me sitting over there just so I can sign off properly and give you guys a farewell. All right, so I hope that was helpful, everyone. Let me know what you thought in the comments down below. Like and subscribe if this was helpful or entertaining in some way. I hope you are all doing well. Until next time, bye everyone.